भी बना हुआ, वो सिलसिला चलता है। इंदौर के कार्यक्रम में झोले ने डॉक्टर सैयदना मुफद्दल सैफुद्दीन साहब और आप सब ने अपना जो स्नेह मुझे दिया, मेरे लिए बहुत अनमोल है। मैं देश ही नहीं, जैसा मैंने कहा, विदेश में भी कहीं जाता हूं, मेरे बहरा भाई बहन रात में अगर 2 बजे भी लैंड किया है, 2-5 परिवार तो आए ही है एयरपोर्ट। मैं उनको कभी कहता हूं इतनी ठंड में आप 2 घंटूंगा, नहीं बोले आप आए हैं तो मैं कम आ गया। वो दुनिया के किसी भी कोने में क्यों ना, किसी भी देश में क्यों ना, उनके दिलों में भारत की चिंता और भारत के लिए प्रेम हमेशा दिखाई। आप सभी की ये भावनाएं, आपका ये प्यार मुझे बार बार आप सब खींच लाता है। साथियों, कुछ प्रयास और कुछ सफलताएं ऐसी होती हैं जिनके पीछे कई दशकों के सपने लगे होते हैं। मुझे बात पता है कि मुंबई शाखा के रूप में अल जमाया उस तहसिया का जो विचार हो रहा है, इसका सपना दशकों पहले ही जो होली ने सैयदना अब्दुल कादिर नईमुद्दीन साहब ने देखा था। उस समय देश गुलामी के दौर में था। शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में इतना बड़ा सपना अपने आप में बहुत बड़ी बात है। लेकिन जो सपने सही सोच से देखे जाते हैं, वो पूरे होकर के रहते हैं। आज देश जब अपनी आजादी के अमृतकाल की यात्रा शुरू कर रहा है, तो शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में बोहरा समाज के योगदान की अहमियत और भी बढ़ जाती है। और जब आजादी के 75 साल की याद करता हूं, तो मैं एक बात का जिक्र जरूर करता हूं, और मेरा तो आप सबसे आग्रह है, जब भी आप सूरत जाएं, मुंबई आए, एक बार दांडी जरूर हुआ है। दांडी यात्रा महात्मा गांधी आजादी का एक टर्निंग पॉइंट। लेकिन मेरे लिए सबसे बड़ी बात वो है कि दांडी यात्रा में, दांडी में समर सत्याग्रह के पहले गांधी जी आपके घर में रुके थे दांडी में। और जब मैं मुख्यमंत्री बना तो मैंने आपसे प्रार्थना की, सैयदना साहब से मैंने कहा, जैसा साहब मेरे दिल में बहुत बड़ी इच्छा है, एक पल के गंवाए बिना बहुत बड़ा बंगलो समुद्र के सामने है, पूरा बंगलो मुझे दे दिया, और आज वहां बढ़िया स्मारक बना हुआ है दांडी यात्रा की स्मृति में। सैयदना साहब के वो यादें दांडी यात्रा के साथ अमर हो चुकी। आज देश नई राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा नीति जैसे सुधारों के साथ, यहाँ बहुत सारे पुराने और आज वर्तमान वाइस चांसलर बैठे हैं, मेरे सारे साथी रहे हैं, अमृतकाल में जिन संकल्पों को हम आगे बढ़ा रहे हैं, महिलाओं को, बेटियों को आधुनिक शिक्षा के नए अवसर मिल रहे हैं, इसी मिशन के साथ अल जमायातुल तहसिया भी आगे बढ़ रहा है। आपका करिकुलम आधुनिक शिक्षा के हिसाब से अपग्रेडेड रहता है, और आपकी सोच भी पूरी तरह से अपडेटेड रहती है। विशेषकर महिलाओं की शिक्षा को लेकर इस संस्था के योगदान सामाजिक बदलाव को एक नई ऊर्जा दे रहा है। साथियों, शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में भारत कभी नालंदा और तक्षशिला जैसे विश्वविद्यालयों का केंद्र हुआ था। पूरी दुनिया से लोग यहां पढ़ने और सीखने आते हैं। अगर हमें भारत के वैभव को वापस लाना है तो हमें शिक्षा के उस गौरव को भी वापस लाना होगा। इसलिए आज भारतीय कलेवर में ढली आधुनिक शिक्षा व्यवस्था ये देश की प्राथमिकता है। इसके लिए हम हर स्तर पर काम कर रहे हैं। आपने देखा होगा पिछले 8 वर्षों में रिकॉर्ड संख्या में यूनिवर्सिटी भी खुली है। मेडिकल एजुकेशन जैसी फील्ड में जहां युवाओं का रुझान भी है और देश की जरूरत भी है, उसे देखते हम हर जिले में मेडिकल कॉलेज खोल रहे हैं। आप देखिए 2004 से 2014 के बीच देश में 145 मेडिकल कॉलेज खुले, जबकि 2014 से 2022 के बीच 260 से ज्यादा मेडिकल कॉलेज खुले। बीते 8 वर्षों में देश में, और एक खुशी की बात है, देश में हर सप्ताह एवरी वीक एक यूनिवर्सिटी और 2 कॉलेज खुले। एवरी वीक। ये स्पीड और केस इस बात के गवाह है कि भारत उस युवा पीढ़ी का पुल बनने जा रहा है जो विश्व के भविष्य को दिशा देगी। साथियों, महात्मा गांधी कहते थे कि शिक्षा हमारे आसपास की परिस्थितियों के अनुकूल होनी चाहिए, तभी उसकी सार्थकता बनी रहे। इसलिए देश के शिक्षा व्यवस्था में एक और अहम बदलाव हुआ है। ये बदलाव है एजुकेशन सिस्टम में स्थानीय भाषा को महत्व देना। अब हम देख रहे थे सारा गुजराती में इस प्रकार से कविता के माध्यम से जीवन के मूल्यों की चर्चा हमारे साथियों ने की। मातृभाषा की ताकत, मैं गुजराती भाषी होने के कारण तो शब्दों को ऊपर उस भावना को पकड़ पा रहा, मैं अनुभव कर रहा। साथियों, गुलामी के समय अंग्रेजों ने इंग्लिश को ही शिक्षा का एक पैमाना बना दिया। दुर्भाग्य से आजादी के बाद भी हम उस हीन भावना को ढोते रहे। इसका सबसे बड़ा नुकसान हमारे गरीब के बच्चों, दलितों, पिछड़ों और कमजोर वर्ग को हुआ। प्रतिभा होने के बाद भी उन्हें केवल भाषा के आधार पर प्रतियोगिता से बाहर कर दिया जाता। लेकिन अब मेडिकल और इंजीनियरिंग जैसी पढ़ाई भी स्थानीय भाषा में की जाती है। इसी तरह भारतीय जरूरतों के हिसाब से देश और भी कई बदलाव किए। पिछले कुछ वर्षों में हमने पेटेंट इकोसिस्टम पर काम किया और पेटेंट फाइल करने को आसान बनाया। आज आईआईटी, आईआईएससी जैसी संस्थानों में पहले से कहीं ज्यादा संख्या में पेटेंट फाइल हो रहे हैं। आज शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में बड़े पैमाने पर टेक्नोलॉजी का इस्तेमाल हो रहा है। इसलिए स्कूलों में लर्निंग टूल का उपयोग होने लगा है। अब युवाओं को किताबी ज्ञान के साथ ही जिन
deals across the board, from higher education to space to AI and so many other things. But I think that what we're seeing here, or what we will see, is a reflection of what, in my view, has become a true strategic partnership. Not an alliance, but a strategic partnership. So this is a relationship that has deep levels of cooperation, including increased intelligence sharing. That requires significant levels of trust and goodwill, which is there now. And also you have cooperation across many different areas. For me, or at least from a U.S. perspective, I think that reflects what is a strategic partnership. There's nothing wrong with transactional partnerships. Some associate the word transactional with something negative. There are plenty of good transactional relationships, but I think that this relationship has escalated to a point where one could safely describe it as a strategic relationship and all of the benefits that come with that.
Let's look at those two words. I know there's a lot of wordplay here, transactional and strategic. Amitabh Bachchan, I'll quote that the Economist editorial which said, to work, the relationship will have to function like a long-term business partnership. India and America may not like everything about it, but think of the huge upside. It may be the most important transaction of the 21st century. Is this a transactional relationship? Is this a relationship now based on pragmatism to check China, the expansionist Chinese economy in a multipolar world? Or do you see it, as Michael Kugelman suggested, as something more now significant, i.e. a strategic partnership that goes deeper than just business?
I would agree with Michael Kugelman that this is a relationship which has gone beyond the transactional, whether it's a strategic partnership or it is even something more than just a strategic partnership, we'd have to see. There are moments in history and moments which make history. And I think Prime Minister Modi's visit to the United States, I suspect, will make history in a Churchillian sense. Now, even before the Atlantic Alliance was drafted and institutionalized, the United States and the United Kingdom had a special relationship. I think what you're going to see is the birth of a really special relationship, which will of course do business together on a variety of the fronts, which will include Make in India, which will include creating jobs in America and the transfer of critical technology. But it is the coming together of a worldview, a Western strong, and frankly speaking, I have no hesitation in saying that the rise of hegemonic, belligerent China is what draws the two together as much as their values, as the rise of the Soviet Union, the rise of communist powers brings the Atlantic Alliance together. So while India and the United States will agree to disagree on perhaps the war in Ukraine or perhaps some domestic issues regarding India's internal affairs or again what America's domestic politics, the fact is that the overarching convergence will make these differences almost trivial in hindsight. There were always differences between the US and the United Kingdom, even when they had this special relationship. It was about reassuring each other from time to time and realizing that these minor differences will exist in the best of marriages. But you don't separate, you don't let that discord over minor issues destroy a relationship. So Prime Minister Modi's visit is Churchillian also because I think amongst the few leaders of the free world who actually spoke to the both houses of parliament on more than one occasion was Winston Churchill. So if I was to make that comparison, and since this is about hype, I say this is a visit which is in its landscape, in its overarching worldview, almost as important as by that great British leader almost 75 years ago.
I'll come to Prime Minister Modi and his role and trace the history of Indo-US relations in a moment. But Daniel Markey, you also agree that this relationship is now going beyond this containing China to actually being a relationship that works at multiple levels, from clean energy to technology transfer to business dealings, India emerging as the 5th largest economy in the world, set to overtake Japan and Germany by 2028. Does that become the great attraction? Is this America's business is business, or something more significant that we are seeing likely to happen in this visit?
Well, look, I think it wouldn't hurt to put the visit in a bit of context here. For now about 2 decades, it's been about more than just China. In fact, I think from the beginning, going back to the Clinton administration, we would say that it's been about many other things. It's been about business as business. It's been about politics and diplomacy, and it has been about defense relations. So in a way, that's more continuity than change. But I think the thing that has really accelerated this relationship are mutual concerns about China. And that says a lot about China's behavior, not least along India's borders and in the Indian Ocean, as well as elsewhere, which has raised serious concerns here in the United States, which you hear about all the time, and obviously has heightened anxieties in India. And that's where I think the core of the relationship now rests. In a way, the other aspects, though they continue to be important, have not accelerated as rapidly as that, as the core concern about China. That's the subtext of just about everything that's being done. I think there is a shared and important mutual interest there. I might not go so far yet as some of the other panelists in suggesting that that's the foundation for something of a proto-alliance. But I do think, just as the United States has had shared security concerns with many other countries in the world in the past, and has worked closely with them, there's a great deal more that the United States can do with India on that basis. While the other aspects of the relationship, they're commercial, people to people, and so on, there's also a lot more that we can build on. We're starting, unfortunately, a couple of decades ago, we were at a relatively low in the relationship, and there's a lot more that can be done to build upon these things. Even if I don't agree that we're on the cusp of a true alliance, or even nearly so.
Okay, that's interesting. I just want to trace now the arc of this relationship, and this is interesting because we have some wonderful archival footage, and I'll bring you in, Meera Shankar, in a moment. India-US ties over the years. 11th October 1949, just for people who think history only begins in 2014, Jawaharlal Nehru met US President Harry Truman. He referred to it as a goodwill tour, met with Senate, House members, and the Indian diaspora, much smaller than. 17 December 1956, Nehru meets US President Dwight Eisenhower, only world leader at the time to stay at Eisenhower's farm. This was Jawaharlal Nehru. US economic aid to India was doubled after the visit. 6 November 1961, Nehru goes to the United States on a state visit, meets US President John Kennedy, and they held multiple summits. It was a visit where Nehru was greeted rather euphorically, and Kennedy approved increased aid to India. Then we come to Indira Gandhi, 27 March 1966. She meets US President Lyndon Johnson. This is, of course, against the food crisis in India. It results in increased US food and development aid. Eventually, of course, India broke away to have its own green revolution. 9 November 1971 was a significant visit. Indira Gandhi met US President Richard Nixon. That meeting was extremely frosty. The meeting was held just ahead of the India-Pakistan war, and famously Indira Gandhi apparently didn't look at Nixon during the state dinner. Meet, remember, also was over the humanitarian crisis building in Bangladesh. 30th July 1982, Indira Gandhi met US President Ronald Reagan, signed an agreement on the Taraport Nuclear Plant Corporation, signed an agreement of French uranium supply for the Taraport Power Plant. 12 June 1985, Rajiv Gandhi met US President Ronald Reagan and became significantly the first Indian Prime Minister to address a joint Congress meet, spoke of the IT revolution that was building up at the time. 31st Jan 1992, Narasimha Rao achieved a major breakthrough at the time. In a post-Cold War era, met US President George Bush, only Indian Prime Minister to meet at the time with George Bush. September 2000, Atal Bihari Vajpayee met US President Bill Clinton. This was a very important visit, addressed the joint US Congress session. It was against the backdrop, of course, of India having gone nuclear and India's seeming nuclear isolation. Instead, the two leaders signed a landmark next step in strategic partnership. 18 July 2005, very significant, Manmohan Singh meets US President George Bush at the time in the Civil Nuclear Cooperation Initiative. And this is where the defense ties were opened up, which we are now seeing Mr. Modi take to another level, an energy dialogue initiative. 24th November 2009, Manmohan Singh met US President Barack Obama. It led to the Indo-US strategic dialogue. So the point being made is that this is a continuum. Would you agree with that, Meera Shankar, that today, while should we look at this as Mr. Modi's outreach to the US, or is Mr. Modi carrying on a continuum, particularly what we've seen happen in the last 25, 30 years after India liberalized its economy?
Yes, I think there were really two factors which enabled India and the US to reassess and rebuild their relationship, and that was the opening up of the Indian economy in 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So I think these two factors really enabled the two countries to re-look at their relationship, and since then there's been a concerted effort from both sides to see how we could work on commonalities, build greater substance into the relationship, and move towards a truly strategic partnership. So, you have the nuclear deal, which was absolutely transformative, removing one major issue which had constrained and bedeviled the relationship for many years. It also involved the US changing the international regime of the nuclear suppliers group to allow civil nuclear cooperation with India. So it was a fairly major initiative which was taken. After that, you had the whole liberalization of the defense and high technology export regime, because even after the nuclear deal, India was at the lowest rung. We were on par with Sudan when I was ambassador for purposes of US defense and high technology exports, even at that stage. And then during President Obama's time, we began the process of liberalizing this regulatory regime, eventually leading to India being declared a major defense partner of the US, on par with the US's closest allies, and a strategic trade authorization, placing India in category 1.
So you're saying in a way from where we were sort of par with Sudan, as you rightly put it, to where we are today. It's been a huge shift, particularly qualitatively over the last 20 years. But I just wonder, Michael Kugelman, therefore should we look at it in terms of the Prime Minister Modi's outreach? Here is a Prime Minister who a couple of years ago was in the United States. You had the Howdy Modi event. He said, Abki Baar, there was all this sloganeering of Abki Baar, Trump Sarkar. Mr. Trump comes to India, is greeted euphorically. Trump loses out. The Biden government comes, but the relationship seems to only get strengthened. So has the relationship risen above all partisan political divides, both in the US and here in India?
Yeah, there's absolutely multi-partisan support in Washington and in New Delhi, I think, for this relationship. And I know that some have pointed to some criticism coming from some members of Congress from the Democratic Party who have been critical about the rights and democracy situation in India. But I would argue that criticism on that front should not be taken as opposition to deeper partnership on the whole. And, I remember when India was experiencing that terrible COVID surge back in 2021, some of the very members of Congress that had been critical of India on rights and democratic backsliding issues have been the very first to issue messages of solidarity and support for the Indian people and for U.S.-India partnership during that COVID surge. So, yeah, I think that's been one of the big success stories for the relationship. And this is also not new. I mean, this has been in place for some years. But, if you look back to the civil nuclear deal, which I think was mentioned earlier, there had been some opposition to that deal, both in Washington and in New Delhi. But we've come a long way from that. I think at this point, you're not going to have much significant levels of opposition from any one political party to any type of broader agreement that would advance U.S.-India partnership. And I think that's an indication of just how far things have come. But just, I wanted to agree with what Dan had said earlier about how the issue of China in recent years, and particularly the increasing provocations and activities that China has undertaken, I think, has sharpened the urgency on both sides for the need to work more closely. Both India and the United States have seen their relations with China plummet to their worst levels in many years, and especially since 2020. And I think that's significant. But this is the arc of the relationship is notable in that if you go back to 60 years, almost to this week, you had the first state visit by an Indian leader. That's when President Ramakrishnan arrived in Washington June of 1963. And looking back at the footage and the commentary on that visit, what were the messages? What were the themes? Well, two largest democracies in the world. You saw a lot of that. And also a lot of focus on how the two countries would work together to counter Chinese aggression. This was in 1963. Obviously, things would take a different direction later on when the U.S. would get closer to Pakistan and the U.S. began to see China as an opportunity, not a threat. And so we came back to where things have been the last few years, where China became a competitor in the eyes of the U.S. That opened a pathway for a resumption of partnership between the U.S. and India on great levels. So it's an interesting, complex trajectory, but in some ways we've come back full circle to where we were in 1963.
Amitabh Mattu, just looking at that arc again, you've got a situation where the civil nuclear agreement is signed by Manmohan Singh in 2005. But you come to 2008, and by 2008, you've got the left parties which oppose it, withdraw support to the Manmohan Singh government. That slows down some of the defense cooperation between the two countries. Now you're in 2023, you're going to have technology transfers. You've had some element of criticism at times of the Modi government in the US on democratic rights, on human rights. President Obama spoke of religious freedom. Mr. Malki, do you believe that these issues no longer matter, therefore, that even if some individual may raise it today in the US Congress, or there may be those in India who might have question marks over US defense deals with India, do you believe all of that is behind us? We have a complete bipartisan consensus, in your view, Mr. Malki, in both countries?
Oh, sorry. No, I don't believe that it's all behind us. I think politics are politics, and they will continue. I think that the United States, when it thinks about India, has traditionally and continues to see India as appealing for an expectation of shared democratic values. And I think that that will be a critical part of how we assess the nature of our relationship. And to the extent that that persists or grows or improves, I think there's plenty of political space, as we've already discussed here in Washington, a bipartisan that favors closer partnership. But if that erodes, and if there are deeper concerns, then it will have political consequences. And I think...
What are those concerns? Are there any concerns at all? Daniel, Marty, do you want to flag up? Is there any principal concern that could prevent this relationship from becoming this full-blown alliance that some are speaking about?
Yeah, look, India's worldview, even as a democratic state, is not and has not been identical to that of the United States. And that's part of what your history showed, actually. Through that entire history, except for the period of the emergency, India has been a democracy, and so has the United States been a democracy, and yet our worldviews have not aligned. And throughout the Cold War, we did not see eye to eye on a variety of issues. Pakistan has been mentioned, the Soviet Union has been mentioned. So democracy alone hasn't been a determinant of the U.S.-India relationship. But it is an important part of how Americans, at least, have perceived India, and it shaped expectations for what they thought they would get from India. And at times, I think it shaped them in ways that have led to more misunderstanding than good understanding, and I think that that continues to be a potential concern going forward.
There was a book written, A Strange Democracy in India and the United States by Daniel Cutts several years ago. But Amitabh Mattu, you will recall 22 years ago when Vajpayee went there, the Kashmir issue hung over the two countries. Even earlier than that, there was Robin Raphael, who was during the Clinton administration. She had raised concerns over human rights in Kashmir. Do you believe all those issues now no longer matter? That's where the relationship is at a different level. Unlike in the past, the two countries now agree to disagree on a few issues but want to move forward at all costs.
There are two things. First of all, these issues acquire salience when other issues are not important, and also a certain instrumentality when the United States wants to use this to gain leverage over India. Now, Robin Redfern was, of course, not far from the course, any golf course, and she was someone who was deeply embedded in the Pakistani establishment. So she was a peculiar diplomat in the first place. But as of today, these issues are there in the larger landscape, but they are not as significant as they were in the 90s, early 90s, or even the early 2000s.
Is there how much of that has to do with Prime Minister Modi? How much of that has to do with an institutional relationship in your view?
I think one important factor which we have not talked about, Rajdeep, and you are aware of that, is the huge support and euphoria within the Indian diaspora in the United States. If you were to have an election within the diaspora, Prime Minister Modi would win 90% of the votes. The diaspora has been a key mobilizer of support for this relationship and for Prime Minister Modi. In fact, I was in the Bay 2 weeks ago, and there was almost every major city in the United States wanted Mr. Modi to visit there, and that was drawn by this diaspora. So if on top you have Prime Minister Modi plus Tripura working together to build this relationship, of course, the Dudley deal was a significant moment, and we have moved from, as you said, estranged democracies to not just being engaged democracies, but enriched others. So if Dennis Cox was to write his book today, he would probably title it Established Partnership for the Future, which doesn't mean that India will give up its quest for strategic autonomy, this space, or that the United States will always see India through the prism of its own democracy. See, what will happen is that these issues will become marginal to our larger strategic goals.
Let's turn to that diaspora, because I've got Geeta Mohan, who's tracking our diplomatic affairs editor, who's in New York at the moment, tracking it. Tomorrow, Yoga Day, the Prime Minister will lead the yoga celebrations at the United Nations. All part of Indian soft power there, Geeta. You've got a situation where you've got top business schools headed by Indians, top companies like Microsoft and others headed by Indians. How much of the diaspora will play an important role, particularly leading up to tomorrow, where yoga will be seen again as perhaps a sign of Indian soft power before the world?
Well, Rajdeep, the diaspora has begun to play a very important role, not just when it comes to soft power diplomacy, but you will see them not just over here outside the New York Palace Hotel. They've been waiting. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is yet to land. It's about an hour to go. And then after that, he will be coming from this very stretch, if you see. This is his hotel, the entire road cordoned off. His cavalcade will come through over here. And the Indian diaspora waiting to say one namaste or hello to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He might walk down this road, and normally as he does. Jagdish, how excited are you?
We are very excited to welcome our dynamic and visionary Prime Minister Narendra Bhai to New York. You can see this, it's a working day, but Sunday you will see hundreds of people by the time he lands there.
What is it, if I may ask, Geeta, about this diaspora effect? Prime Minister Modi has spent a considerable amount of time, we've seen in the past, in the United States. It's interesting, Meera Shankar, that, there is a photograph that I saw this afternoon. Prime Minister Modi as a BJP leader in the mid-1990s, in his short sleeve kurta, along with a few others, as Gola before the White House in the mid-1990s. He's had a long love affair, in a way, with the United States. Do you believe that the United States has taken to Prime Minister Modi as much as the Indian diaspora, or is the United States still, in your view, what does Prime Minister Modi, according to you, need to do to make sure that he is seen as a leader of Churchillian, to use the word Amitabh, but to use almost like a Churchillian vision?
Well, firstly, I think that the United States has certainly decided that its strategic partnership with India is going to be one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century, and critical for shaping a better balance in Asia in the face of China's increasingly aggressive behavior in the maritime domain and on land with its neighbors and over Taiwan. So it's a decision which has now enabled the two countries to move to a higher degree of technology sharing, to looking at critical and emerging technologies.
I take that, but the Prime Minister himself, the Prime Minister himself,
think
you know,
the
you've
Prime
seen
Minister-
various Prime Ministers over the years when you were US Ambassador,
Yes,
you've seen
I
Indian
would
Prime
say
Ministers.
that for the diaspora, Prime Minister Modi is a highly popular leader, and and within the US, he is seen as someone who's a strong leader in India and can deliver, and obviously someone with whom the US can do business. There have also been concerns about some of his policies, but I think the priority is to build the strategic relationship in the context of China, and these other concerns have certainly been given lower salience and handled somewhat tactfully and very delicately by the Biden administration, which has chosen not to talk about issues where there may be concerns
That's
about
interesting
India's
because-
domestic policies in public.
That's interesting because this is a Democratic administration. In the past, the Democrats have been the ones to raise, for example, human rights concerns. Michael Gugelman, how does America see Prime Minister Modi? Do they see him in the same euphoric terms as the Indian diaspora does? Or is he simply seen as a strong leader who America can do business with?
Well, I think opinion is very nuanced here. I don't want to suggest that U.S. Opinion toward Modi is monolithic. Certainly, official views from the U.S. government and I think the broader strategic and foreign policy elite in Washington are certainly concerned to an extent about some of the policies that Modi is carrying out at home. But on the whole, we're very supportive of Modi in the context of working with him and others in India to strengthen partnership with India. But when it comes to broader public opinion, well, here I think the issue of soft power looms large. That I would argue that many Americans, in part because of the impact of the diaspora here, have a positive view of India. That may have changed a bit to an extent, particularly over the last few years, as we've seen more media coverage that's been highlighting the democratic backsliding and concerns about rights. But I think on the whole that public opinion is generally speaking positive, and again that does come down to the diaspora effect. But I think it's very important to distinguish between official views in the government and the views of the broader American people. And I should say also there are plenty of Americans that aren't really that inclined to take a strong interest in foreign policy just because they don't have to, and may not really have much of any sort of strong opinion at all about India or Prime Minister Modi or his visit. And I should also say, finally, that indeed that Geeta Mohan had been highlighting the excitement and the euphoria from the diaspora about Modi's visit, but certainly there are some Indian Americans that don't feel that way about him. Certainly survey research shows that there's a lot of support for Modi within the diaspora, but you also have those that aren't inclined to support him.
Right.
And there will be protests, I should say, against Modi when he is here, and some of the participants in those protests will be diaspora members. So I think it is important to provide the full picture.
Okay, let's leave it there. I think all four of you have provided a glimpse of that larger picture, and we've taken you down memory lane also in a way from Nehru to Modi. This is a continuum to the ups and downs, estranged democracies who could now finally be rediscovering each other in the 21st century. I appreciate all my guests joining us as we continue to track that Prime Minister's visit to the United States. Let's take a break. When we return, we'll turn to the other top stories of the day. Also, our ground report today on the heat wave that has claimed all the flights across northern India. You're watching the news today. News without the noise.
Where the software engineer meets the smart market analyst, meets the talented photographer to create the big dream. The world comes together at Shah Gandu. the software engineer meets the smart market analyst, meets the gifted content writer. To create the big dream, the world comes together at Sharda University. So where are you?
The most credible ranking of India's best B schools is back in an all-new avatar, bigger and better than before. Catch the 2023 listings of MBA programs, technology companies, and the top executive courses. Don't miss the 24th edition of the Business Today Best B Schools and HR Summit on